Texas, Mr. Paul.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make a few comments. I'm not going to ask specific questions. I'd like to submit my questions in writing and then have a follow-up on that. But just a few comments. I wanted to talk about something you wrote on page 6. It said, monetary policy independence prevents governments from succumbing to the temptation to use the central bank to fund budget deficits. You know, I think we're already there, and that's one of my big contentions about what's happening is that we have had license to spend, we borrow, then we don't have enough, and then the Federal Reserve has been politicized to the point where they do accommodate us, whether it's for the funding of wars or for the welfare state, and that's why I think we have to eventually get to the bottom of this. The Federal Reserve was designed, and their mandate was to make sure we have full employment, price stability, and stable interest rates. Well, in my lifetime, interest rates have been 21% and less than 1%, so they failed there. They want a stable dollar and stable prices. Well, we have continuous inflation. We have a 4-cent dollar that started off as a dollar in 1913, so it's total failure there. And we don't execute proper oversight, and it's our responsibility, and that's of course what I'm arguing for. It's supposed to have full employment. I mean, when you look at the free market calculation of unemployment, and even government statistics indicate unemployment now 16 to 20%, and the Federal Reserve is arguing that they have to have more secrecy. This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And more power, people are arguing we give more power to the Federal Reserve. What we need is more oversight and more transparency rather than more authority to the Federal Reserve. I mentioned earlier, and I think we still have to continue to think about it, is what example have we ever had where the GAO had an influence on policy? They are an independent agency of government, and they just don't influence policy, and I just don't believe that all of a sudden, because we have an audit, we as the Congress are going to be looking over the shoulder. That's not the intent of the bill whatsoever. But I want to just mention very briefly about the foreign activity. You've explicitly said don't touch the foreign activity. Well, the foreign activity is very important. Those are essentially treaties. You have agreements with other governments, other central banks. You commit funds, which is indirect taxation because you don't tax the people for it. You just print the money. And you make these deals and promises to interfere in markets. You're involved in the President's working group on financial markets. This we all must find out about. We have to know about this. This is our responsibility because ultimately it leads to what the dollar's worth. The Federal Reserve, if anything, they should be protecting the value of the dollar, not deliberately destroying the value of the dollar. These are essentially treaties. The same way, when you create money out of thin air to subsidize something or bail somebody out, you've assumed the authorization, the appropriation process. We're derelict in our duties as members of Congress to allow this to happen. It's a government unto itself. So I am going to follow up. I'm going to put this in writing, and hopefully I can get some answers. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentleman. The gentleman from Kansas City, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For 5 minutes.
I think, I mean, Dr. Paul is obviously very well informed on this issue, maybe better than anyone else in Congress. But I recently had lunch with the chair of the Kansas City Fed, and we had a great, an interesting conversation. And I asked him as we sat in the dining room looking out of the window, I said, how many of the people do you think walking by here can make 2 sentences about what the Fed does? And he said none, which was the correct answer. One of the problems I think we have, and I'm not sure that the Fed can solve it, is most people have no idea what the Fed does. And in our system of government, that's always going to create problems. Now, I'm not interested in defending the Fed. I will a little in just a minute. But when things happen, like the bank bailout, that sours the opinions of the public and Congress, because sir, Mr. Alvarez, most people, and probably most of them sitting behind you, and most of them in my district, believe that Congress took a specific vote to give money to the banks, when, as you know, that did not happen. And so the transparency was missing. And I go home and people say, you guys voted to give the money to the banks, and when you say we never took that vote. And so then the next question is, well, how did they get the money if you guys didn't vote to give it? And so I want you to explain to some of the folk in Kansas City, Independence, how the banks got the money if this committee never recommended it to the full House, and then the Senate, and then conference, and then the President's signature.
So I believe, Congressman, you're speaking about the troubled asset program, the TARP program that the
Yes,
Treasury
toxic
runs.
asset removal program. We're going to remove the toxic assets from the market so that people would have a greater deal of comfort in becoming actively again involved in the assets. We did not do what the Swedes did, which they took the assets, put them in, separated them in what we called around here a bad bank. We didn't do that, but we did bail out the banks. At least that's what the public believes.
So of course, the Treasury is in a better position than I am to discuss that program. But in summary,
well, the Fed was involved.
So in summary, I think the expectation was that those funds would be used to buy troubled assets. It became clear in October of 2007. 2008, that it would take quite a long time to work through the details of an asset purchase program that would be effective. In fact, Treasury and the FDIC continue to work on those details now. This is more than a year later. But it also became clear in October that the events of last fall, the economy was struggling tremendously. There were very many troubled institutions, and confidence in the banking system needed to be restored. And so Treasury took the decision that it was most effective and most necessary to use the funds there to inject capital into the banking system to restore confidence in the banking system. The Treasury did that not by giving money away, and I think that's an important point to make. It was investing the money in banking institutions, and that money's being repaid, and repaid with profits,
interest,
and repaid with interest.
Okay, let me stop you there because I'm going to turn on you. One of the problems that people don't know anything about what the Fed does. Hopefully some of that can be laid out. Do not the funds that you earn return to the U.S. Treasury?
Absolutely, sir. All the excess funds we earn beyond expenses are given over to the Treasury for use in dealing with the debt.
Purchases, liquidity, loans.
The interest on the loans we
Gentleman's
make,
time has
the
expired.
interest we get on our assets. That's
Gentleman's time has expired.